In a Middle East gripped by Operation Al-Aqsa flood and Zionist strikes, the Palestinian Ministry of Health reports more than 900 martyrs and over 4,500 wounded, while the opposing forces suffer over 1,000 casualties and 300 wounded. With clashes ongoing and escalating violence, both sides face a grim reality with a big trail of devastation and uncertainty. Follow us as we try to dissect the unfolding drama, analyze the high-stakes battlefield, and explore the pivotal moments that will shape the hours to come ahead. In today's program, we navigate the turbulent waters of this crisis and seek answers to the burning question, what lies ahead in this epic showdown? This question and more will be examined by All 24 News special panel of guests shortly. Hello and welcome to another episode of All 24 News Special. And before we bring in our guest, here's the latest. 4 days into the conflict between Hamas and the occupation forces, Gaza sees relentless shelling on its civilians and children, resulting in a rise in death toll and thousands wounded.
In a heart-wrenching onslaught, Zionist forces continue their brutal rampage through various regions of the Gaza Strip, raining down airstrikes and mercilessly bombing residential areas and crucial infrastructure. The sheer scale of this aggression has pushed it into the realm of war crimes, with entire families being exterminated.
They try to escape death only to find it. The occupation plans follow them. From the east to here, they came to find shelter. They were taking refuge next to their stairs, where it could have been a safe place. They targeted them and killed them.
This is indeed an unprecedented wave of violence, targeting unarmed civilians, including innocent children, with no end in sight since Monday. The death toll has soared to a staggering more than 900 civilians and 4,500 wounded. The relentless bombardment has left a trail of destruction, reducing buildings, homes, and vital facilities to rubble with no mercy.
At 10 p.m., we started to help people injured in the shelling, and until now we are still retrieving body parts. The last operation we did was pulling out a small girl from this area. This is a blood of injured people. Some injured people were sleeping here. This is their blood.
The horrifying consequences are clear as over 200,000 Gazans are forced into internal displacement, fleeing the persistent waves of Zionist assaults. Even the Rafah crossing point, a lifeline between Egypt and Palestine, wasn't spared. The Zionist authorities have warned Egypt against providing aid to the besieged and battered Gazans, further exacerbating the humanitarian crisis. Even journalists covering these tragic events have also found themselves in the crosshairs. Media networks and press freedom monitors report that these brave journalists have been targeted even in their easily identifiable uniforms.
Targeting the journalist is nothing new to the Israeli occupation. Every time it proves that it is something systematic. We lost a number of our colleagues since yesterday and until today, and it was very painful.
Tragedies don't stop at the sporadic shelling. The occupation forces have cruelly cut out water, electricity, and gas supplies to Gazan residents, leaving them in the dark, both literally and figuratively. The internet and phone networks have also been disrupted, compounding the suffering of the already beleaguered Palestinian civilians who bear the brunt of this unrelenting assault, trapped in a dire situation that could be one of the most critical in decades.
All right, let's bring in our guest. Joining us live from Italy is Ms. Romana Robeo, Managing Editor of the Palestine Chronicle, Rome. And from California is Dr. Hamoud Salhi, Associate Dean Professor of International Education at California State University, USA. along with Dr. Raed Dabi, Head of Political Science Department at Al-Najah National University, Nablus, Palestine. Gentlemen, ma'am, thank you for agreeing to join us in the show. And I would like to kick it off with you, Ms. Romana Robeo. There was a video that went viral on social media of the Zionist Minister of Defense in which he said, and I quote, "I have ordered a complete siege of the Gaza Strip, no electricity, no food, no gas, everything is closed. We fight human animals and we act accordingly." End of quote. How do you personally see this act of dehumanizing the enemy and therefore justifying all the atrocities that can befall upon them? What's your reaction here?
First of all, thanks for having me, of course.
Our pleasure.
First of all, the process of dehumanizing Palestinians is not a new phenomenon. It is something that has always accompanied the Zionist project of colonialism of Palestine. It actually accompanies every process of colonization. And in the case of Zionism, it is protected and, by the international community. The Yoav Gallant's words were aside from this process of dehumanization, they contained a direct and outright call for genocide. But the very scary thing is that Yoav Gallant is not alone. Today, one U.S. presidential hopeful Nikki Haley, who was a UN ambassador, a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations a few years ago, she openly called for genocide. She asked to Netanyahu to kill them all, to kill all Palestinians. So there are these direct calls for genocide, and there are other calls for genocide that are less direct, but it's every time the international community turns its back to the plight of the Palestinian people and to what is happening in Gaza and to what was happening in Gaza soon before the start of the Al-Aqsa flood operation. In a sense, this is a collective responsibility of the so-called international community, I would say, of the West and even all Western media who depict the Palestinian situation in a very biased way. They are completely biased towards Israel.
And Dr. Hamoud Salhi, with over 900 martyrs and over 4,500 wounded and still counting, Palestinian civilians are really facing a grim reality. What's your take on what is happening and this startling development?
It's a tragedy unfolding before our eyes, and with the support of the Western world. It seems as if the event of Saturday where it just came out of vacuum, out of the sky. No one seems to think that this is a result of what Romana talked about, systematic punishment, violation of international law, and the thousands of Palestinians that have been killed by Israelis up to this point. What's happening at this point, at this juncture, is putting an entire population, Gaza population, in a state of collective punishment, which is condemned by international law. Also, what Romana talked about, and you asked her, the dehumanization of these people. We see pictures taken of buildings with no mention of the Palestinians' families on the Western media. Today, President Biden gave a speech, 12 minutes and 15 seconds. The vast majority of that speech, perhaps 10 minutes, all about relating stories, emotional stories, how he connects, how the American connects with the Israelis, and putting Hamas as a terrorist organization, trying to distance that Hamas from the Palestinians, and making a point, an emotional plea to the world to rescue the Israel, and ending by saying that the United States is there to support Israel. There is no discussion about peace. There is no discussion about de-escalation or any ways, or what we used to think about. The two sides are to be blamed. In fact, there was a story when the tweet initially was put out by, released by the Palestinian Affairs and State Department, which they called for the end of to stop violence. It was deleted right away. There seems like this anger, and this call for vengeance, as if we're not talking to Palestinians or a human or having it in a life. So it's a tragedy. It's truly a tragedy unfolding on our eyes, and the Western world seems to take this as a as a normal, or these people they are not people as your question earlier, Karim.
Thank you so much. Clear. And Dr. Waed Dabi, the losses suffered by the occupation forces in the Al-Aqsa flood operation, which amount to over 1,000 casualties and 3,000 wounded, and the count is still on. Don't you think that this raises the question about perhaps the state in which the occupying forces are in? Preparedness-wise, perhaps this being exposed to critical security loophole in the well-armed, supposedly Zionist entity, which takes pride in its security system, backed by advanced weapons and Western support. Can it recover its shaken global image through what it's doing towards civilians?
Yeah, this is the Israeli mentality from the beginning. Always try to jump over the political issues by killing civilians and by security answers. There is no security answer to the political issues, and unfortunately, US and the West, including Europe, decided again to jump over the Palestinian right of self-determination, that the elephant in the room, which is the more than 75 years of occupation and apartheid and sieging more than 2.2 million living in Gaza Strip, by bombing the civilians, killing children, killing elderly people, and removing even Gaza from the land. This will never lead to any answer to the question. There is no security answer to what's going on in Gaza, except the Israeli, the American, and the West recognition of the Palestinian people in freedom and self-determination. But unfortunately, it seems that not just Israel, but even America and the West didn't want to learn from the lessons of the past, and they want again to jump over all the political solutions, close all the political doors in order to cover their security failures. Again, what's going on resulted by more than 75 years of occupation, apartheid, Israeli right-wing government policies in West Bank against Al-Aqsa Mosque, against the churches, against the humiliation of Palestinian people, both in Gaza, West Bank, East Jerusalem, as well against the Palestinian people living in the 1948 lands. Again, the world decided to close the eyes and to jump over all the political questions. This will lead to more anger, more escalation, and this will never lead to any political solution for the problem.
Back to you, Ms. Romana Rubeo. Does the excessive use of military force and atrocities committed against Gaza, especially against civilians, reflect maybe a kind of a mix-up of being freaked out, panicked, and confused at the political and military levels of the occupying entity, that is?
Yes, even here, there are two levels of interpretation. On one side, Israel has always been extremely brutal towards Palestinians because the ultimate goal of the Zionist project is the erasure, what Ilan Pape calls the incremental genocide of the Palestinian population. In this case, though, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government know that the only way to respond to what was an outright humiliation, and so to the sense of frustration that now is going through Israeli society, was to respond in a very strong way. Even the words that Netanyahu, the language that Netanyahu used with Biden today were directed at that. We have to respond, we have to be brutal, we have to win this war. Don't forget that Netanyahu is an embattled politician who is dealing with all sorts of issues, even at a personal level, a politician that needs to survive politically. And his view is particularly short-sighted because he merely wants to survive politically with this government. And he wants to obtain and acquire the approval from Israeli society as much as he can. And sadly, how can you acquire the approval of Israeli society? By being harsh towards Palestinians. And this is not something I'm making up. This is something proved by the fact that the only government more or less stable in Israeli recent history is the most extremist right-wing government that Israel has never known, and Israel has a history of extremist governments. So Israeli society is keen on canceling the Palestinian population. There are many polls that go into this direction, and Netanyahu now needs to create this sense of collective unity, national unity around the goal of erasing the Palestinian population with the justification that they are victims of terror and all the things that we are used to hear from Netanyahu and his ilk.
Great. And Dr. Hamoud Salhi, bear with me here, I'm going to be a little long with this question. Haaretz newspaper literally specified that the entity has 4 options, the best of which remains a better choice still. These options are, first, releasing thousands of prisoners, something that will give Hamas a tremendous morale boost. A second choice is a devastating air campaign in which thousands of civilians are going to be killed. Or a third one, lightening or tightening the siege on Gaza in a way that may cause a major humanitarian catastrophe, something that we are already seeing, at least the beginning of which. And the fourth one, a large-scale ground operation, which may fail because we know that the Zionist army is not really experimented at what you call a guerrilla warfare. So what is your reading of these scenarios?
Well, Harris is that liberal who sees freedom is suited for the Westerner, but not for the Palestinian. In other words, the premise is the same thing. There is no mention there of a possible or urging the Israeli establishment for a peaceful solution or reaching a compromise or put an end to this. It's a reading that justify talks more or that represent an Israeli view that despite the fact that you have, for example, organizations that do support the Palestinians, today there is a number of Jewish organizations in the United States who are calling against Israel. So we have that, but the overall presentation of Harris leave us really with no option but a continuity of the same. The scenario most likely is the Palestinian resistance has made it clear that there will not be a release of the hostages until this war ended. In other words, until the Israelis stopped killing the Palestinians. That's when the release of hostages will come. The Palestinians who are been living in Israeli jails that could be for the Israelis to take the step to release them, but that's not an option. I think what's happening, we are going to continue this for a little while. And the Palestinian resistance will prove once again that Israel has to come to an end and to put an end to its sort of massacre of the Palestinians. There has to be something for Netanyahu. Is also known for his sort of aggressive anti-Palestinians terrorist acts. But he would face, he's about to face a serious challenge. And I think the challenge is whatever he does, he already proven as a failed leader from the Israeli perspective. So from that perspective, he's going to look for some kind of face-saving formula that will give him some kind of a win or a victory. And he thinks by putting all this, what he has doing in Gaza, will make him a winner. But the end result, the solution is in fact in the hand of the Palestinians who are inside Gaza, and also the Palestinian resistance. So I really don't have a good scenario, Karim. I think the hope is that for the world community to come in and start putting pressure on the Israelis to put an end to this and do something about a peace resolution.
Great. Let me just include Dr. Raed Dabia here. How do you find Dr. Hamoud Salhi's analysis about those different scenarios? And just to add an info, the Hebrew media itself began promoting the possibility of liberating Palestinian prisoners and the necessity of understanding the reality of the situation. What implications do you think this will have?
Well, first of all, Netanyahu has no choice. First of all, our political prisoners have every single right to be released. And this different operation by the resistance aims before anything else to find a political path in order to release our political prisoners. But it's very clear that the mentality which controls Netanyahu and his gangs is the mentality of occupation and apartheid. And now, what does he commit against our people? The ethnic cleansing, removing entire neighborhoods in Gaza from the land, will lead to nothing, because Netanyahu should understand very well that the political game before 7th of October is not the same before 7th of October. The game who get used to adopt that as much geography as they can with as much little demography as they can is part of the past. Now the Palestinian resistance has a lot of strong points that they can use, including the prisoners that they have, majority of them from the Israeli officers and settlers and soldiers. This will definitely lead to political prisoners swap according to the conditions of the resistance. Otherwise, I think there will be no political path and no solution. Hamas says it very clearly: we will never negotiate under the aggression. And this should be understood very well by the West, by US, that there is no security answers, and that the very only way to end this complicity is going to the table of negotiation, releasing Palestinian political prisoners, which PA and PLO tried to do during the previous 30 years by negotiation and by peaceful methods. And unfortunately, the different Israeli government just decided to deny the right of Palestinian political prisoners in freedom, even in a fair situation. And now Israel has to accept that under the pressure and under the the resistance conditions.
And amidst all this and amidst the Zionist violence in Gaza, thousands are seeking refuge in UNRWA schools, triggering a humanitarian crisis. International organizations urge the opening of corridors for vital aid to reach Palestinians in need of food, water, and medical care.
In scenes that depict their suffering, thousands of Palestinians have sought refuge in UNRWA schools across Gaza as the number continues to rise, exceeding 20,000 people in 44 schools, according to the UN agency.
I wish I could be a normal child, living with no war, no rockets, so we can safely return home.
As this dire situation unfolds, the United Nations has issued an urgent warning about a looming humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. They've decried the comprehensive blockade as a form of a collective punishment, a clear violation of international law.
Two UNRWA schools sheltering displaced families in Gaza were also hit. Some 137,000 people are currently sheltering in UNRWA facilities, with the number increasing as heavy shelling and airstrikes continue. Relief and entry of essential supplies into Gaza must be facilitated, and the UN will continue efforts to provide aid to respond to these needs.
In response to this crisis, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has urgently reached out to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres via phone, beseeching the United Nations to intervene swiftly and put an end to the ongoing Zionist aggression against Palestinians. He stressed the international community's obligation to provide protection to them. Furthermore, Human Rights Watch echoed concerns over the Zionist defense minister's decision against Gazans, urging the International Criminal Court to deal with his statements, which appeared to incite genocide and mass starvation.
Galland's statements are abhorrent, and depriving residents of occupied territories of food and electricity constitutes collective punishment. This type of action constitutes a war crime, just as the use of starvation as a weapon. The International Criminal Court should take note of this call to commit a war crime.
Simultaneously, the World Health Organization has called for the immediate establishment of a humanitarian corridor into besieged Gaza. They emphasize the urgent need to supply essential medical provisions to the population.
The World Health Organization is also calling for an end to the violence. Health facilities, patients, health workers, and civilians in general have to be protected and safeguarded, as Dr. Tedros has said over the weekend. A humanitarian corridor is needed to reach people with critical medical supplies, and WHO will work with partners on this.
This unfolding crisis paints a grim picture of an imminent humanitarian catastrophe in the region, where over 2 million residents have endured a 17-year-long blockade. The international community faces a critical test in responding to this dire situation and preventing further suffering in Gaza Strip.
All right, back to you, Ms. Romana Robeo. The United Nations is calling for humanitarian relief in Gaza and sounded the alarm of a humanitarian crisis. Why is the UN's role seemingly restricted and at times even ineffective in such crises, despite the repeated urgent calls on the organization, that is, for immediate intervention?
Absolutely. Israel is one of the the main violators of UN resolutions in history. But in the meantime, Israel has never been held accountable for its war crimes, repeated war crimes, crimes against humanity, because withholding food to a whole population as a tool of war, as a weapon of war, is also a crime against humanity. But we have seen in the past that the whole system of international law doesn't work when it comes to Israel. At the United Nations specifically, the United Nations have dozens, hundreds of resolutions that highlight Israeli violations of international law. Since the very start, since the United Nations resolutions which imposes Israel to guarantee and to allow the right of return of Palestinian refugees. All of these things have always been ignored by Israel. Why? Because it is how the system works. The system allows for Israel to be protected by the veto power, for example. Every binding resolution at the United Nations so far has been stopped by the veto power, granted to the United States. So it is a symbolic tool, but it can't be an effective tool. This doesn't mean that we don't need to pursue that, the trajectory and that path of international law. It is, a combination. The struggle for the Palestinian liberation has to be a combination of several factors. As Professor Richard Falk, the former UN Special Rapporteur for Occupied Palestine, say, this is a legitimacy war and it's made of several components. Even international law is important, and we have to insist because Israel has to be held accountable. For example, in front of the International Criminal Court, we know that trial, that procedure started, but now is basically at a standstill. We need to insist because Israel has to be held accountable and Israeli officials have to be held accountable. But we know that the liberation of Palestine will not only come from a system which was created by the West and was supported by the West. It will come from the Palestinian people itself. And we, from the outside, we have to do all we can to express solidarity and stand with the Palestinian people in their struggle for liberation.
Clear. And Dr. Hamoud Salhi, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, condemns the Gaza siege, which he says puts civilian lives in danger. And it is an internationally prohibited act. How do you see such international calls? Is it going to impact the situation? Are they going to be effective whatsoever?
It will be effective, and it's a good reminder, a constant reminder of the atrocities that Israelis do against the Palestinians. Now, we have in these days, you have the power of social media. We talking today about two narratives, narrative that is sort of in the West, but it's also you have narratives in social media which talks about the rights of the Palestinians, the kind of discussion, the kind of program that we have here. And that is powerful. Yes, the international law is, controlled by the United States. I mean, the United States has a big hand in stopping every action against Israel. It has done it on many, many levels. Countless resolutions in the Security Councils have been vetoed by the United States only. It does. But it's a good. But this doesn't mean that the rights of the Palestinians, that Israel is not held responsible. It is held before the international community. Now, it takes a lot more than that. I mean, being optimistic, perhaps looking some kind of bright light in this. Yes, that is very important. But it is also the responsibility of other communities, the Arab world, the leaders, everyone, the communities. And that's sort of where we should be, where Israel sort of is going to be affected. The power that Israel has in the United States is not reflected in the United Nations General Assembly, or for that matter, even the United Nations Security Council. The injustices that is committed against the Palestinians are recognized and will have a huge impact, particularly in our age of social media.
And Dr. Raed Dabi, on the other hand, the Palestinian Ministry of Health demands immediate action to open a safe corridor for the entry of health aid and medical delegations and to facilitate the movement of the wounded and sick who do not have access to treatment in the Gaza Strip. What is required here, according to you?
What is required? Applying international law and human rights. What we seek as Palestinians, that Israel should deal during the state of war as any other country, respecting international law and respecting UN resolutions and respecting the right of people, civilians, elderly people and children to be secured during the times of war. I fully agree with your guest from Rome that Israel get used during the previous 75 years to be to deal and to be protected by international community and by the West and by US as a state above the law and a state above all international regulations. What's going on now is a complete war crimes against people, against humanity, ethnic cleansing against our people. And as we've seen today, Israel reject the Egyptian initiative to send some humanitarian support or medical relief for the people in Gaza. They refused the Palestinian Authority calls to respect international law during the state of war. And again, Israel has the full protection by US and by the West. This will never lead to victory to Netanyahu and his right-wing government, but this will lead to more complicity, and this will lead to more anger in the Palestinian land, and this will never lead to any political path for this problem. Netanyahu thinks by killing children, by killing elderly people, by targeting civilians, he could achieve a victory where he could continue his ruling in Israel, while he doesn't want to face the reality on the ground that there is no security answer for the political issues.
What about you, Dr. Hamoud Salhi? Do you agree? Do you think that the option of imposing a complete and strict blockade in the hope of inciting the population against the resistance is something that is ineffective for the Zionist entity? Don't you think that such measures perhaps often strengthened the people's will and solidarity with the resistance?
And the history is there, Karim. This is not something that the Israelis have done just recently. They've been doing it for ages, for 75 years, as we all know. The exploitation of the Palestinians cannot sort of continue. And what we've seen this week is a strong indication that the resolve of the Palestinians is very strong, and they are going to fight until independence. This is known. I mean, we keep thinking about in Algeria, and we connect very well with the Palestinians because, and no comparison whatsoever. But there was a myth when the Algeria, before it led its revolution in 1954, that the French would not be beaten. But they were beaten, and you know, United States was participated through NATO in against the Algerian, and we see that happening. The resistance that we've seen this week, the kind of struggle that the Palestinians have done, will lead somewhere. So I strongly believe that, you know, measures like this do not last. This is why people talk about peace. And what's ironic about this is that it seems the United States, the Western world, are sort of always seeing that peace from their own perspective. We have yet to see, for example, a single Western leader talking about, violence must be sort of condemned on both sides. Not even that this time around. Why? Because the Palestinians made a point that they cannot continue be dehumanized. Their mosque, or the mosque of the Muslim world, being treated with a lack of respect and all of that. When they said it's enough, then we've seen this reaction. So, Karim, I agree 100%. The Palestinians resolve will win, and the Palestinians will win down, if not sooner, later.
All right, I invite you and or our esteemed guests, dear viewers, to see how key world leaders expressed the urgent need for diplomatic solution while EU reaffirmed its aid delivery to Palestine, reflecting a diverse global approach to settle the crisis.
Some countries around the world condemned the wave of Zionist attacks, which left huge human and material losses in Gaza Strip, while others called for de-escalation. In his latest TV appearance, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro voiced his support for Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in his effort to find peace through a diplomatic path and called for ceasefire in the Middle East.
President Mahmoud Abbas, with whom I've talked on several occasions, has called for the United Nations decisions to be respected for peace negotiations and ceasefire. We support Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in his search for peace through a diplomatic and peaceful path. Palestinian people must be respected.
Elsewhere in Turkey, President Tayyip Recep Erdogan urged Zionist forces to stop bombing Palestinian land and shown his country's readiness to play a mediator role in solving the conflict.
Gaza being razed to the ground with disproportionate attacks from air and land, mosques being bombed and the deaths of innocent children, women and old people, and civilians experienced in the meantime can never be accepted. I would like to express that as Turkey, we are ready to mediate on all areas, including prisoner swaps, should the sides request it.
For his part, Russian president considered the conflict as U.S. policy failure in the Middle East by monopolizing negotiations and ignoring Palestinian interests.
We see a sharp escalation of the situation in the Middle East. I think that many will agree with me. And this is a clear example of the failure of the policy of the United States in the Middle East, who tried to monopolize the solution.
Many are warning against cutting off aid to Palestinian civilians amid accusations that EU aims to suspend aid and payments for Palestine, which European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell denied. He also stressed the principle of a two-state solution as the only way to solve the Palestinian issue.
So we have to scale up and recalibrate our dynamic that we wanted to create in New York when 60 states attending the meeting declared that they were in favor of the two-state solutions. And it was an overwhelming majority with maybe 2 or 3 exceptions of the member states stating clearly that the cooperation with the Palestinian Authority has to continue, and the funding has to continue, and the payments should not be interrupted.
Despite ongoing diplomatic initiatives to address the conflict, Palestinian civilians and territories continue to endure significant airstrikes from the Zionist entity.
Back to you, Ms. Romana Robeo. The Wall Street Journal quoted American officials that Washington may send an additional aircraft carrier to the Middle East near Israel. The possibility of the U.S. sending an aircraft carrier to the Middle East raises many questions. To whom do you think is this American military presence sending a message?
First of all, let me tell you that I find the behavior of the United States in this precise phase utterly irresponsible, because I find it very weird that a superpower like the United States are not asking for an immediate ceasefire, for an immediate humanitarian corridor. They're basically calling for genocide. They're basically calling for retaliation. I find it this very dangerous and very irresponsible. That said, yes, I think this is a message. The elephant in the room here exists, and it is Iran, and it is Tehran. And this is for both the United States and Israel. In the case of the United States, Antony Blinken also said this could be linked to Iran. So the message is sent to Iran, and with Iran to the whole new multipolar world. The United States, we all know that this is a very dangerous phase for them. It's not, the triumph and the glory of the past anymore. The situation in the Middle East is particularly scary for the United States. Remember that the United States withdrew from the Middle East and completely misread many situations, including this one. If we think that 2 weeks before October 7 and the beginning of Al-Aqsa flood operation, Jake Sullivan said that the Middle East was quiet now, was a quiet moment for the Middle East. So he completely misread the situation. They really thought that, for example, pursuing the path of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, excluding the Palestinians, ignoring the Palestinians. Let's remember Netanyahu at the United Nations in New York with a map that didn't have Palestine in it. So they thought that they could exclude and ignore the Palestinians and the Palestinian people altogether. Well, the Palestinians said, no, this is not the case. So they are reading into the situation. They're thinking of connections with Iran. Personally, I think that Iran expressed its support to Palestinians in several ways, symbolically, and, it could become something else if the conflict, of course, widens with irresponsible actions like the ones that the United States are pursuing. But at the moment, this is a Palestinian initiative because the Palestinian people didn't want to be ignored, didn't want to be neglected.
Let me just bring in Dr. Raed Dabi here. President Biden supports Israel's right to respond to Hamas attacks. Do you think this is a green light for a ground invasion? And what implications does it have for the region, especially since he pledged to provide ammunition and missiles to Iron Dome to ensure that the entity remains able to defend its settlers?
Well, it was very strange. We were waiting a ship of peaceful initiatives by America in order to reach a win-win situation and to have a political solution instead of sending a ship of weapons to kill children, elderly people, and civilians. But let's remind the international community that the veto that U.S. used in its history to protect the Israeli violation of human rights and the war crimes against the Palestinians was more than the veto that America used for itself. So this American protection and umbrella to protect the war criminals in Israel is not a new thing. From the very first beginning of the identity of Israel in 1948, and the U.S. cover its war crimes and cover all of their crimes against the Palestinian people in West Bank, in East Jerusalem, in the 1948 lands, and of course the sieging of more than 2 million in Gaza. That shows that U.S. doesn't want to learn from the history, and that shows that U.S. never been honest broker for peace process, and that shown clearly that we the Palestinians did the biggest mistake when we accepted U.S. to be the sole mediator of the peace process, because U.S. never been part of the solution, they always part of the problem. And please remind me, if you can, to show one conflict that U.S. interfere in Middle East and solve it or make it better. Look at Afghanistan, look at Iraq, look at Syria, look at Yemen. Everywhere U.S. interfere, make more complicated, because U.S. always, when it comes to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict or to any conflict, belong to Israel in Middle East, part of the problem, because Israel is America is biased, and what America try to do is to cover the Israeli crimes against Palestinians. Again, that will lead to more complicity on the ground. Palestinians are all united behind the resistance, because the international community, US and the West, didn't let us as Palestinians any other path. All political paths were closed, and what we witness now is the Palestinian voice against the international ignorance and the Israeli denying of their right of freedom and self-determination for more than 75 years.
Absolutely. And Dr. Hamoud Salhi, what is the meaning of this? I mean, does this generous American support for the entity stem from an ideological commitment or maybe a cover-up for the Biden administration's failure to anticipate a dangerous shift in an extremely important area of international politics? I mean, the US's failure to predict and prepare for Al-Aqsa flood battle, according to you, does it impact Washington's global leadership and influence in the Middle East?
It has in many ways. Let's not forget the dome that is today proved its failure to stop Hamas or Palestinian resistance missile was gifted by President Barack Obama, former President Barack Obama. Israel get $3.8 billion a year in military assistance. Israel also has the entire American arsenal at its disposition should it needs. So all of that, and the United States is now already saying that they are going to send more help to the Israelis. It speaks volume of the ill-advised American strategy in the Middle East, and it is a result of several initiatives in the past that without any second thought put Israel as the only ally of the United States. Just in this context, what happened to those allies that the United States push to normalize relations with Israel? So what's behind it is frankly the elections coming up this time around, and Democrats and Republicans always want to put them to compete who is better than in supporting Israel than the others. The Democrats have proven time and time again that they are worried more about election scores than anything else. Next to that is the fact that the Israeli lobby has a huge thing in American politics, and it dictates. It wants the American media, everybody to be behind Israel. So it's all connected to the power that Israel, an Israeli lobby has in Washington.
And what about you, Ms. Romana Robeyo? Do you see this as some kind of an introduction to different scenarios in the Middle East? How do you foresee these scenarios yourself in the region?
Yes, for sure, this is a watershed moment. I do not think that there will be a situation in Palestine and Israel that will be comparable to the scenario of October 6th. I really think that October 7th changed something, and that the Palestinian resistance wrote a page of history. I have no doubt about it. Regarding the influence in the Middle East, of course, it will have a strong impact in whether this moment of the conflict stops now and there will be a ceasefire, or if it widens the conflict. Of course, the impact can be different, but for sure the role of Israel is going to be different from now on. And also, I think this, at least for the moment, freezes the path of normalization that seemed so smooth in recent weeks, and seemed that they could reach an agreement and they could do everything, speaking about the Palestinians without basically talking to the Palestinian people, maybe just talking to the Palestinian Authority, which we know that their power of representation is not very strong, especially in recent times. We have seen that the Palestinian resistance has gained momentum among the population, and that the Palestinian Authority does not fully represent the Palestinians. And don't forget that Mahmoud Abbas is a president that wasn't elected, his mandate expired many years ago.
And we see the issue is not just there. I mean, we see it reflected everywhere Romana Rubio, if you agree with me. I mean, we just saw in Paris the National Monument and the Eiffel Tower draped in the colors of the enemy without mentioning demonstrations of support, while the pro-Palestinians were prevented from even gathering.
Absolutely. The attitude in the West and in Europe, I know that because I live in a country that yesterday signed a joint statement that was embarrassing, basically condemning Hamas and not saying a single word about the genocide that Israel is carrying out in these hours in Gaza. The hypocrisy and I think the word hypocrisy doesn't even begin to describe what is happening right now. The card of human rights and international law is used just to gain political gains, but it really doesn't mean anything substantial. So I really think this is another problem that it would be good to analyze. Absolutely.
Perfect. And Dr. Raed Dabi, thank you so much, Romana Rubio. I would like to give a final word to Dr. Raed Dabi as we are closing to the end of the show. Could you please tell us why is it so challenging to criticize the actions of the Zionist entity, and how can we overlook the oversimplification of the Palestinian resistance as terrorism in today's discourse?
Yeah, it is the double standard policy that Palestinians get used to see since more than 75 years. It is part of the West and American hypocrisy against the Palestinian people. And again, this will never lead to anything except more Palestinian determination to achieve their national rights in freedom and justice and self-determination. Against condemning Palestinian resistance will lead nothing except more Palestinian determination for freedom and justice, and that will lead to more Palestinian unity and more Palestinian struggle towards freedom and justice.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Raed Dabi. Thank you so much, Dr. Hamoud Salhi and Ms. Romana Rubio, for all these insights. And thank you, dear viewers, for keeping it here on our channel. With this, we have reached the end of our special coverage for tonight. Till next time, take care.